But look, at the weekend, we saw a big weekend of protests, actually. They seem to be happening all over the place. One in particular caught my eye. Billed by so many, as per usual, in the media, has been essentially some kind of raving, mad, far-right, lunatic protest rally. This was the march arranged principally by Tommy Robinson. You can see, I'll show you the banner, the start of this march. It was all about that two-tier Kia fuelled the riots, depending on who you actually believe. Many people say there was a couple of thousand at this protest. Some say tens of thousands. Some people say 250,000. I'll play you. I mean, you laugh, but I'll play you in a second as we're talking. I'll play you one of the clips of people actually videoing the scale of that protest. There you go. So whilst we're chatting away to ourselves, ladies and gents, you can feast your eye on this and you can make your own minds up about what the attendance was, because quite frankly, it'll probably be somewhere in the middle of all of those numbers. Mark Goodwin, let me ask you about this. First and foremost, the notion that this is a far-right rally.
Well, as we've discussed before, I don't think the term far-right is really helpful anymore, because it's used to basically discredit so many movements and ideas in society today. When I watched this rally at the weekend playing out on social media, it sort of struck me that, look, whatever your views about Tommy Robinson or Stephen Yaxley Lennon, whether you like him, whether you don't, it's undeniable at this point that he is becoming a symbol for many people in the country who feel that the English community, the English people, are not treated with the same degree of respect and fairness as other groups in society. And I think for the British state, Michelle, there is a question here around, you know, are they potentially actually turning this guy into a martyr while not dealing with other cases? For example, I've seen over the weekend people saying, well, how come Tommy Robinson is getting rushed into prison and getting dealt with very effectively, but we've got a couple of Muslim lads in Manchester who, as far as we know, still haven't really been dealt with as swiftly and effectively after allegedly assaulting police officers at Manchester Airport? These are the questions people are asking. And I think that's the risk for the British state, that if they continue down this line, they're going to turn this guy into a martyr.
I've got to say as well, of course, Robinson was jailed today for 18 months, apparently for contempt of court. JJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's it. Stephen Yaxley Lennon was imprisoned because he was already told by a court, you've spread false information about this schoolboy. You've made this video. It's factually wrong. It's false. If you repeat those lies, you'll then be in contempt of court and you'll be sentenced. He thought he was above the law. I take issue with Stephen Yaxley Lennon, and that's calling by his real name, because there's no record in this courtland of Tommy Robinson going to jail. But they sentenced him under his real name, not under his pseudonym. He calls himself a journalist. He thinks that he's spreading the word, reporting what the mainstream media won't say. He's not a journalist. He's a person with opinions. There's a big difference between a journalist. There is, Michelle, big difference. I'm a journalist. I'm qualified. I've studied journalism, which is why I know the difference between burglary and robbery.
But I think you sound snobbish. Because being a journalist, the world has moved on now. Being a journalist isn't just about what qualifications you have.
Well, actually, it is.
Well, it's not, actually. When you look at the definition of what a journalist is, it isn't. It doesn't define a journalist based on the qualifications they hold.
If your child cuts their finger and you put a plaster on it, it doesn't make you a nurse. There's a big difference between being a journalist and being someone who wants to go out and report about things. There is a difference between those things.
But the world has moved on now. It's not the media. It's not just the traditional TV.
You will not find...
radio. His documentary, by the way, has been watched by about 56 million people.
But it's false information. That's equivalent of nothing. So someone can watch something that's still false. And it's not mine. I've not watched the documentary. I'm telling you that the courts in this country, our judges, said that information that he's put in that video is false.
Can I just briefly come in? Because I think Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, I don't think he would be anywhere near as significant a figure in our society and our politics had the legacy media class and the political class dealt with the issues that he was campaigning on from 2009 onwards. I mean, again, whether you like him or you loathe him, he was one of the first people in British society to talk quite openly about the sexual exploitation of young white girls at the hands of mainly Pakistani Muslim gangs. Now, the truth is, with the exception of journalists like Andrew Norfolk at the Times, there were very few people between 2009 and maybe the mid-2010s who were interested in that issue.
But you're now conflating two different things.
No, Charlie, sorry, JJ, let me just quickly finish. Charlie Peters made this point recently on GB News. Even at a recent Rotherham grooming case, a court case, he was the only journalist in the room. Now, I take your point about journalism needing experience and skills, and I agree with you, but I'd push back and say, well, the only reason this guy is significant is because the legacy media class refused to cover the issues that he was campaigning on.
And again, I reiterate my point. That does not make him a journalist. And if he, and before you interrupt me again, let me just say add this one last point. If he was a trained journalist, trust me, it's not some easy thing to become a journalist and to do the training. It's not an easy thing. If he was a trained journalist, he would not have been found in contempt of court because he would have known the laws that surround it. You have to study the law of reporting when you do the qualification.
I'm not making the case that he is a journalist or not. Why did the legacy media not cover that stuff?
Speak to legacy media about it. That's not me.
But presumably, in your degree of journalism, you discuss this at university.
What I'm saying is that no matter whether he's a journalist or not, you cannot take the law and think that you are above it. No matter whether he's an established journalist or he's just a reporter, whatever it is, you can't be above the law, and that's why he's been imprisoned. He's not been imprisoned because of the Uniting the Kingdom march, which I don't think are far-right protests, but he's not in prison because of that. He's in prison because he has broken the law, which he was warned not to, and he did it regardless.
And I have to say, he did actually plead guilty to some of these charges today. But I find this kind of notion, I think there is such a snobbery that goes on within the media, because I think someone like a Tommy Robinson or people that do similar roles in a similar way to him, they would describe themselves often as citizen journalists, and they would actually argue that they don't have, let's just say, the agendas, for want of a better word, of many of the mainstream media outlets. And it's an undeniable fact that more and more people are actually turning to these new outlets to get their information because they feel that there is a bias within traditional legacy media.
But then you're talking about, if we talk about the film that he's been imprisoned over, it's a film full of false narratives and lies. And that's what our judges have said. So whether people are turning to that or not, what you're saying is people are turning to a person or other forms of media where there is, because they distrust the mainstream media, but they're listening to a video that has been told in court to be fake.
I've got to say, I mean, I watched this. I did watch this documentary a little while ago now, but from my memory, and people will correct me if I'm wrong, as I recall it, there were some very strange things going on as the tale was progressing, but also it was made clear that the person involved, the schoolboy involved, denied lots of this stuff, and that people were saying that it was false and so on and so forth. So whilst information was presented, it was also countered with that narrative that people were suggesting that it wasn't true, leaving people essentially to watch it and make up their own minds, as people are free to do and should be free to do in an open society. Another thing that caught my eye, did you want to come back in?
It's fine.
Because another thing that caught my eye was Reform UK. Now, this weekend, Richard Tice, he was on the Camilla Tominey programme, and he was asked specifically about the goings-on at this protest. Listen.
Tommy Robinson, people have been protesting in his name. What do you make of Tommy Robinson? Is he a good guy in your eyes?
No, all of that lot, we have nothing to do with them.
Even the protesters who have got banners up saying two-tier Keir, you agree with them on the policing and justice?
We agree with ourselves. I'm not aligning ourselves with Tommy Robinson's lot in any shape.
All right. A lot of people have got quite offended by that, because people have interpreted what he was saying, because he was specifically asked about the protesters, and he said he weren't aligning themselves with Tommy Robinson's lot, i.e. people are meaning the protesters. But there is a huge crossover, I would imagine, between the people that attended that march and the people that voted for reform. Some are saying it's Richard Tice's Gerald Ratner moment, is it?
So I think, if you look at the country generally, there are clearly millions of people who do not feel represented by the elite class in this country on issues around mass immigration, broken borders, the rise of radical, violent Islamism, and issues like grooming. That is obvious. We see that. The question then is, well, what's the most effective way at challenging the elite consensus on those issues? And this is where people go in different directions. There are people like Tommy Robinson or Stephen Lennon who say the best way forward is street protests, demonstrations and rallies, a bit more like the French. But there are other people who say, actually, that is going to alienate and stigmatise many people, and the best way forward in terms of bringing real change is through the ballot box. And in order to do that, you need to basically build a coalition of people that is about twice what the Reform Party got at the general election. So instead of 14%, you're going up to 30, 35. Now, everyone has their own views as to what the most effective strategy is. But it's quite clear, I would argue, that there are lots of people who do view street activism, street protests, street rallies, as not sitting as comfortably within our civic culture, within British culture, as they do in, say, France or Italy. We just have a slightly different culture. And I think that is where this tension is coming in. It's about what do you think is most effective at changing the country we all love? We all want to improve Britain. We want to try and save the country. What's the most effective way of doing it?
I think it's unfair for Camilla to ask Richard Tice that question, purely because Tice is a politician. And his sole job, or his sole raison d'etre now, is that he wants to get reform as big as possible and get them into power. If reform, and this is not me looking down on Tommy Robinson and his followers, but if he wants to get reform into power, it's not so much the people who follow Tommy Robinson religiously he needs to convince. It's more disenfranchised Tories who are not going on Tommy Robinson marches. It's more disenfranchised Labour supporters who are not going on Unite the Kingdom marches. Those are the people who reform need to win over. So to align himself with a smaller group, and I say there's millions of people who may support Tommy Robinson, but we're not seeing millions of people on these marches. To align himself with a smaller group that alienates the other two major parties, I think would be a poor choice from Richard Tice.
What do you think to that at home? I do want to say as well, I'm always fascinated by how protests do get covered in the mainstream media. Did you see the counter-protest? Let me show you one of the images that caught my eye from one of the front of that. Why on earth, and this is a guy called Adam Brooks, he works on GB News as well, but why do you need to go to a protest? If you believe in your messaging, you're apparently the good guys, because this was a stand-up to racism type counter-protest. Why are you there with your balaclavas on, looking, what I would argue, pretty menacing and intimidating? And why on earth is that allowed on the streets of Britain? Why are you allowed to balaclava up like that to deliberately try and intimidate people? Don't even get me started on that one, ladies and gents. I just find the way that these counter-protests and all the rest of it are reported absolutely fascinating. I do have to say that banner I showed you at the front about "To Take Care," fueling the riots. He's not here, Keir Starmer, and if he was, I'm sure that he would dispute that very passionately indeed.